My name is Fleur Johns and I am the Academic Director here at UNSW of Meridian 180, which is hosting this event. Meridian 180 is a collaboration platform within the Thought Leadership and Grand Challenges portfolio based here at UNSW and also in Korea and Japan and the US, about which you can find much more information on our website. But our focus today is something in which I'm very confident that you're doing very widely and prolifically already, which is collaborating. I know that you are already collaborating, whether that's part of a research team or a project team or with co-authors and colleagues near and far. I'm confident that you're already very expert at this, but despite this extensive and widespread collaboration here at UNSW, it's something about which we tend not to focus explicitly. That is, why do it and how to do it effectively, is not really a conversation that we have very often. And it is a conversation that we're going to have today and that we'll be having throughout this series that we're launching today, and that will hopefully extend into next year as well. We're having two further events in this series, one on the 28th of October and one on the 26th of November. And the aim is to explore different aspects of collaboration, different challenges to those who seek to collaborate in new ways and how we can tackle those more effectively. And I'm very thrilled to say that we have two people today to kick off this discussion who have the most varied and extensive and fascinating experience in collaborating and forging collaboration among people with different forms of expertise in different work cultures and in different cultures in other ways as well. And we're going to hear from Penny Burt and Dom Price. But I did just want to say at the outset that we really want this to be a dialogue. There's a lot of expertise and experience in the room. So as you're listening to Penny and Dom, who I'll introduce in a moment, please think about your own questions and insights and experiences and think about how you might share those in the long Q&A we have so that we can galvanise a discussion about how we can build a more effective collaboration culture here at UNSW and be more bold but also more fair in our collaborative endeavours. So have a think about that as you listen. But without further ado, I want to hand over to Penny and Dom, and I'll introduce them first. Penny Burt is the CEO of AsiaLink, which is the foremost think tank promoting awareness of Asia in Australia, based at the University of Melbourne, and also promoting Australia's current and prospective role throughout the region. And Penny took up that role last year. Before then, Penny had 7 years in the corporate sector, occupying senior roles in public affairs, government affairs and external relations within Visa, and before that within McKinsey. And before that, 8 years in a diplomatic role, or a series of diplomatic roles, representing Australia at senior levels in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and at the UN offices in Geneva and New York. So a broad multi-sectoral experience that Penny brings to the conversation today, and also Penny speaks Indonesian and French as well, so has a range of has encountered and dealt with the challenges of collaborating with people across language as well. So we're thrilled to have you today, Penny. Thanks so much for coming up. And also thrilled to have Dom Price with us today. Dom Price is the resident work futurist at Atlassian. Now, Atlassian needs no introduction, I think, to this audience. Many of you know the story of its founding here in 2002 by Scott Farquhar and Mike Cannon-Brookes, and its incredible and impressive rise and performance since that time. Dom joined the Atlassian some 6 years ago as head of R&D and is now charged with trying to envision and prepare for and build capability for the future of work in a range of ways that he'll discuss with you today. Before that, Dom was in strategy and development and operations with Aristocrat for some years and also with Deloitte. But he's in these settings, and particularly within Atlassian, he's been very focused on how, through practices, place, human-to-human interaction, and in technology, we can break old habits and build new ones to ensure more effective collaboration. So thank you, Dom, for joining us today. So I'll hand over to Penny now, and as I said, store up those questions and observations that you'd like to share.
First of all, thank you very much, all of you, for spending time with us today. it's really generous of you to give up the time and to want to join this conversation. And thank you very much to Fleur for the very kind introduction. One of the reasons I think that Fleur asked me to speak today, just to recap my bio, is I've actually worked across sectors in my career, roughly 20 years because I'm very old, 20 years in government, 10 years in the corporate sector. And I have actually just, in moving back to Australia last year, taken up my first ever position attached to a university. So it's interesting in my own journey, having worked across those different areas, and then having worked internationally. In my last roles, I had oversight of 43 different countries and ran teams with, over, I think in each case, over 20 nationalities for companies sort of headquartered out of the US. So I've actually had a strong personal history in what I just call tri-sector collaboration. And being new to the university, for the first time I've really begun trying to understand in my own context how, in fact, to link what's happening in the university and the amazing research, the insights, the capability back into both the public sector and the private sector in a way that perhaps I hadn't done so much of before arriving at a university. So just that by way of introduction. Today I really want to talk a little bit about two things: the why for collaboration, and I know that seems very self-evident, but I'm not sure that we pause often enough to think through the lens of the why. And then a little bit about the how, and Dom and I are going to, I think, talk about very different aspects of the how. We can't resolve all the how today. We've got a series of future workshops as Meridian 180 to really get under some of the how. But I want to talk about the why and the how and some, sort of first steps. And I want to do that by using some practical examples of collaborations that I've been involved in the last few years, if that's okay. But before kicking off, could I just very quickly, I think, Fleur, I got permission to do this, ask, shout it out, do you feel there are obstacles to collaboration, which we talk about all the time, actually, in universities? Are there obstacles to collaboration that you face in a daily way within the campus and then with organisations outside? Any particular obstacles? What are they?
Academics and professional staff using different language and communicating in very different ways.
I love that. That's my point 3, the language barrier. It's a great one. No, but what is actually, we'll talk about this what is really interesting is people, when we talk about language, it's, the Meridian platform, for example, does translation between Japanese, Korean and English. But people forget that universities speak differently to the corporate sector and that academics speak differently to everybody. No, but it's a real point. Great one. Others?
But it's not just language in terms of the type of language in English, but we also have, multicultural aspects as well. So there's not just the verbal language, if you like. There's very much the physical and body language that we use as well, which is very, very different. So it's really intertwined and quite a diverse mix.
Thank you. Others? Other obstacles?
There might be different focus within the organization. For example, sales want to get the products now and sell to the customer, while the R&D or the production needs time to deliver high quality products and business to clients. So different focus.
So competing demands and interests of the parties in the collaboration.
1, 2.
We were just talking before about organisational structure and it being hierarchical and the bureaucracy sometimes preventing effective collaboration.
Hierarchy and bureaucracy, one of my favourites.
Sorry, there was another one there.
I think geography. Australia's not quite the centre of everything, so it's hard to forge collaborations with I guess experts in different countries. So, yeah.
Yep, great point. I think there was another one over here.
Time. I think people
Time.
to their own things and to their collaborative thing can often interfere.
Biases?
Biases. Yep, great one. How about access to resources? Any others?
Yeah, to add to the gentleman's comment about incentive and what is the reward, silos exist for a reason and they have their own microcosms within them. And if you give that a idea, I've got no voice, so maybe it'll help. So the reward question, silos exist for a reason and each has their own microcosm and particular rewards in having a silo rather than a combined effort in some cases.
Yeah, rewards and incentives. So publish or perish, the imperative to publish and have to focus on, getting your papers out the door. It's often a big driver in universities. Financial interest. Okay.
Earning the financial benefit.
Thank you. And one last one.
Related to that is some complexity around funding and then IP as well. So in collaborative teams, often the IP is tied to the funder, but maybe that shouldn't always be the case.
Thank you. I think that's some really useful framing for us to sort of talk through, I guess. We might not be able to address all of those issues, but hopefully in our comments we can address some of those sorts of barriers. So I just want to start off with the why. The question why. Why do we collaborate? People are talking about it. There's lots of, discussion and forums and collaboration is kind of a buzzword. But I don't think we often reflect on the why. I want to just run through some thoughts, some reflections on the why to start off with. I think one of the things that we often fail to recognise is that the biggest challenges in our community, whether it's sustainability, whether it's poverty alleviation, whether it's public health, the future of work, none of these issues can actually be resolved by one individual, one sector, one company. At the end of the day, we work in an ecosystem where, even with the best research and the best insight in the world, it can be it's just too difficult because of the scale of the issues facing our community to really resolve on your own any big problem. And it's actually, it's very interesting having sat inside government. Government often thinks that it's responsible for and has to resolve certain issues. For example, I think Don's probably going to talk about this, unemployment. Well, quite frankly, why is unemployment only the issue only to be resolved by government? Quite frankly, if you don't actually bring together insight from the corporate sector and a willingness and thoughts there, you don't have data and insight and research from the university sector, and you don't have the political will in the community sector, it's very difficult to see government just trying to pull a series of levers in the economy, trying to do now, and believe that that is going to actually deliver an outcome. So I guess my first point is one of the things about collaboration at the end of the day is the scale of the issues that we're dealing with. And I don't know why you guys get out of bed. I get out of bed every day because I love the fact that everything I do can have impact. And why do you research? Why are you in the university? Because I think at the end of the day, you actually want to leave something behind in the world. And maybe that's a big assumption, but impact, I think, number one for collaboration. Number two, in terms of the why, is really getting diversity of thought and getting access to different perspectives. One of the things that I found truly surprising and at first a bit difficult when I worked in McKinsey was every single new project that you would work on for a client, they formed a whole new team. And a new team was formed for every single different kind and different project, because every single different situation was going to benefit from a different mix of skills and perspectives. And those teams weren't just formed, with a bunch of Australians. Those teams were formed to bring together the best expertise globally. So for a month, you might be working with a team that brought together Americans, South Africans, and Thais to be resolving an issue in Indonesia. And within that team, there might be number crunchers and data modelers, behavioural scientists, and historians, because that diversity of perspective actually enabled an entirely different kind of problem solving to come together. So diversity of thought is a big driver for collaboration. All of the research, as you know, suggests that high-performing organisations are diverse organisations, and that you're likely to get to much better outcomes in everything you do if you're actually able to bring together different perspectives. I'm going to deal with, very briefly, one of the issues that I didn't really focus on a lot before I arrived in a university, and that's access to funding. If you're well-funded, put your hand up. Okay. Well done. If you're always looking for opportunities to fund what you're doing, hands up. Absolutely. Yep, me. Collaboration and actually looking beyond the university, and actually particularly working with both the public sector and the private sector to bring your insights and your research to market, is a great way in which to get access to funding. Let me give you a really concrete example. In my last role, I worked quite a lot directly in China, and the company I was working for was very keen to partner with the Chinese government to address poverty alleviation through financial inclusion. We couldn't actually just, as an American company, show up to the Chinese government and say, have we got the answer for you? We're going to eradicate poverty in the northeast of China. What we could do was actually partner with the NDRC, one of the most senior research institutes and an arm of government, to actually help the Chinese government better map and understand through a 2-year research project why poverty was persisting and how people were thinking through the lens of technology about access to finance. And that collaboration actually enabled the NDRC to be funded at scale for that research, which then in turn informed government policy, which then informed a set of corporate strategies, which actually delivered long-term impact. It's a great example, but unlocking the interest there, I'm going to move to the how. Crucial to being able to succeed in those sorts of collaborations is actually thinking through, in the first instance, what are the shared interests in any situation? And again, that seems incredibly self-evident, but I promised Fleur I wouldn't do this. Sometimes in our universities, it's quite hard to look out over the parapet and understand the context in which we're working and where those shared interests might be, and why other people in the community are interested in what you're doing, how you might be relevant to a particular public policy issue or challenge, how you might be relevant to industry, and then actually hooking into that conversation. But defining where the shared interest is, absolutely essential. The Chinese example that I just gave you is a great one of where each part, each sector, each player had a very defined but separate set of interests. Chinese government, poverty alleviation. Visa, to be blunt, long-term, getting more digital payments used across China and being seen to partner with the Chinese government. The Research Institute, doing groundbreaking research through the lens of behavioural economics on how people were interacting in the financial services sector. It was a win-win-win, which actually enabled real impact at scale. But actually, again, it sounds self-evident. People don't always think through that lens when they're looking for collaboration outside the university context. Mutual benefit, not just mutual interest. I would actually underline that, because sadly, no one's going to give you anything for free, and collaboration does not work well when there are asymmetrical benefits. At the end of the day, collaboration has got to be able to deliver for all the parties who are there. Showing up. It's a different aspect of forging effective collaborations. We're working at the moment as AsiaLink together with the Australian National University and PwC and National Human Rights Commission, great tri-sector partnership to host a summit on Asian Australian leadership. It's a great initiative, and I wanted to reach into the university to find out what research had been done already on diversity in the organisation and on diversity across the community in Australia. It's really interesting when I did reach into the university and I found people doing incredible research. None of that research had made its way back into government, and none of it was being used by the Human Rights Commission or by our companies in framing the diversity policies. It was sitting inside the university with no kind of aperture for getting out. And until I picked up the phone and started cold calling academics, several of whom wanted to know why I was interested. And if I was actually, I got asked by someone if I was white, which I thought was a very strange question. They hadn't heard of the fact that we were doing this big national summit on Asian Australian leadership. So actually understanding the context and looking actively for opportunities. I'm going to stop there and just say I hope that that's just, at 50,000 feet, given some sort of initial thoughts about collaboration.
Thank you so much, Penny. It has indeed thrown a lot on the table. And I think drawn out the sense of humility that collaboration requires, that it starts from a place of humility. And also perhaps if you think of collaboration in the wartime context requiring betrayal, I think in a way, Penny, you were urging people to try out some betrayal also in the, trying out, understanding the limits of where they are working at the moment and thinking about how they might work around or beyond those limits. Which brings us perfectly to Dom and the future of work. So thanks, Dom.
Thank you. Thanks again. Thanks in advance for your time. For those of you that haven't noticed, I'm a 6'4" white guy. I'm an alpha male. Collaboration is a weird topic for me. It's a weird topic for me because I used to confuse collaboration with the fact that I'm really loud and quite confident. And so for most of my career, I would spend time in meetings going, that was awesome collaboration, because no one disagreed with me. And it's because I didn't hear the introverts. They're brilliant. They don't say anything. And so I'd leave the room. I'm like, that's brilliant. I mean, my idea's still good. I feel like we've got some momentum. High fives all round. I'm awesome. Let's just carry on. Until I realized that wasn't my collaboration superpower. That was my collaboration kryptonite. And actually, I needed to evolve. I need to evolve the way I work and think. As a piece of context, I have the best made-up job in the world, right? It doesn't need to exist. It shouldn't exist, and it's brilliant. I spend my time flying around the world, helping to educate people in corporates, in governments, in businesses all over the world, and leaders all over the world to understand what the future of work might look like when none of us actually know what it's going to look like. And so I can literally say anything and they can't not believe me, because there's no amount of research that says whether it's true or not. And if it doesn't happen, I blame others. And if it does, then I just credit my crystal ball. So let's talk about collaboration from a person that's not in a university, that's not a researcher. I am by definition a recovering chartered accountant. I graduated in the year 2000 from Sheffield University in the north of England, and my parents and my two older sisters said to me, Dom, you are going to become a chartered accountant, because if you become a chartered accountant, you will have a job for life. And as a guy growing up in the north of England, that was a dream. I mean, a job sounded cool, but a job for life was just this mecca that I could never imagine. Obviously, no one told me that being an accountant was terrible, and that I'd be awful at it, like absolutely awful at it. And so this futurism is actually nothing about the future. It's all about evolution, right? It's all about changing a little bit every day, which is why collaboration is something that's massively misunderstood. It's misunderstood because we often confuse it with consensus. Even within my own organization, I see, in fact, the more intelligent the people, the more likely they are to try and get consensus, because the brains in the room override the angst. Now, what we actually look for when we talk about diversity, we actually talk about something slightly different, which is respectful dissent. Because diversity is your invite to the party, inclusion is your chance to fucking dance like you've never danced before. And way too many people think that diversity is the answer, and it's not. Because we've got a diverse group of people in the room, but if you don't feel comfortable being your true authentic self, if you don't feel comfortable to share and to challenge and provoke, then you might as well not be in the room. So inclusion for us is more important. And to actually foster that in our organization, where we have a huge amount of researchers, we have a very a decent sized research arm as part of our R&D, the D of development and the R of research, is this idea of cognitive diversity and respectful dissent. The chance to turn around and say, I really appreciate you sharing that idea, but I politely disagree with the way you're approaching it. Have you thought about X or Y or Z? And it's hilarious, because it ends up in some kind of intellectual war and battle of the minds, but actually that friction, those sparks, that's what creates the genius in my business. I often talk about the idea that great minds don't think alike. Because great minds are terrible when you put them together, because you just nod a lot. Oh yes, that's a brilliant idea. But that's confirmation. That's very different from collaboration. So let's be honest about collaboration. It's painful. It's really hard. We talk about it like it's a natural muscle for us. For me, I work on the program where we help on board graduates from universities, wonderful universities like this. And no offense to any universities, I love the work that you do. You are tremendous institutions. Please stay around forever. However, one of the things that happens in the education system is two pupils who talk to each other. That's called cheating. And then you join my workplace, and I call that collaboration. So I have to untrain 20 years of practices. And it's not that I'm against them per se, but when someone joins my organization, I don't examine them and I don't test them, and I don't check for knowledge acquisition. I check for knowledge application. And so for collaboration to work, not only do you have to be able to bring your true self, you have to know the human-to-human practices of what make collaboration work. And in theory, that should be easy, because Atlassian didn't invent collaboration. We've made a lot of money from collaboration. We didn't invent it. Caveman and Cavewoman invented collaboration on Cave Wall, right? We've been storytellers for years, and that's what collaboration is. It's telling a story about my perspective. One of the best bits of advice I got recently, which is something we're trialing at Atlassian now, from a professor at Stanford, a chap called Huggy Rao, Hagavera Rao, absolutely mad as a box of frogs. And he's written a few books, very entertaining chap. You can look at some of his talks. But partway through one of his sessions, he just stopped the room and he said, less hippo, more elephant. And I was like, he's been smoking the wacky backy again. He's gone off on one. I was like, what are you talking about? And he said, when you're in a meeting, close this, open these. And he said, and don't open your ears to respond. Don't open your ears to tell the person that they're wrong. Open your ears and genuinely consume what the other person's saying. And so I was chatting to him afterwards, and I was like, brilliant idea, genius. I'm going to steal that off you. And he said, Dom, there's one more barrier for you to be a good collaborator. So I've got my pen and paper, and I was like, what? And he said, your ego. So that's a bit rude, isn't it? He was obviously wrong. Definitely not got an ego. But it was real, because what I realized was, and I'm going to guess that this might be a challenge for you, you're so passionate about the thing you're researching you probably use phrases like, it's my baby, or it's my idea, or this thing that I'm growing and nurturing, and it's not. It's not yours. It's something you're looking after for someone else. And so the realization I had was me trying to hold my ideas really close to me was me just protecting my ego and my own self-esteem, and actually letting go of those ideas meant we had a way better chance of solving them. Because the diversity in the room, the different opinions, viewpoints, experiences, and challenges meant that those ideas took on a life of their own, and we were much more likely to solve them well, solve them for the right person, and solve them with that diversity of thought. A lot easier said than done, because it's my idea, right? I even use the phrase, and it's my idea. It's not my idea, it's an idea. So I've been learning a way of parking my ego at the door when entering meetings, and actually realizing that my role as a participant in that team is to amplify the team and to get the best outcome possible, whether it be my original idea or not. That is secondary. To do that is very difficult. We are naturally very passionate people. We are naturally independent in the way we think. But if you think about it, and there was a recent study on this, and this is why I love research in this field, a recent study showed that 90% of organizations are solving problems so complex they have to be solved by teams. Brilliant. So when I saw that, and Atlassian's mission is to unleash the potential in teams, our stock ticker symbol is teams, I'm like, yay, every organization needs teams. So we did our own piece of research. We contacted loads of customers, lots of other organizations around teamwork. 89% of people that we asked said that they did not trust their teammates. So we're in a position where the complexity of the world we're in requires us to work in teams. It's just we all know when we work by ourselves, it's a damn sight quicker and a damn sight easier. And the problem is just other people aren't as clever as us. And that's the problem we need to solve, right? Because if they spoke the same language, had the same rituals, it would just be so much easier. And this is the honest thing about collaboration. It's not easy. It's scrappy, it's messy, it's painful. It requires you to part your ego. It requires you to compromise, to adapt, evolve. It requires you to ask more questions and listen with the intent to understand, not to correct the other person. And so the final bit of advice I'd give you on collaboration was from Dan Pink. So Dan Pink's, if any of you read of his material, I've got a bit of a man crush on him. But I got to meet him at South by Southwest in Austin a few years ago. And I was talking to him about the whole idea of collaboration and the whole idea. I was like, I don't want to start a movement, but as a 6'4", really confident white guy, is there anything I'm missing? What are my blind spots so that I can improve and get better? And he gave me one piece of advice. And it was one of those things, I'll be honest, it really annoyed me because it made complete sense, but it was so obvious. I don't know how I've survived 41 years on this planet without knowing this. He said, Dom, argue like you're right and listen like you're wrong. And I kind of paused and I was like, no, I definitely don't do that. I argue like I'm right and I listen like I'm right. But actually listening like you're wrong is this whole new skill. It's so simple because he told me. And then the next meeting I went into, I put my point across with passion, with vigor, with excitement. And then I sat back and I listened. And it hurt. It was painful. I wanted to respond. I wanted to correct people. I wanted to tell people they didn't understand because they weren't right. But it wasn't that they weren't right and I was right. They just had a different view. And so by consuming that stuff, I did not take it all on board. I did not change my path because of all of it. So it wasn't that the consensus of me letting them make the decision. It was me saying, let's just look broadly at the world around me and understand more, because the more I understand, this decision was still mine to make, but the more I understood, the better equipped I could be to act on that. And then the final thing around collaboration is technology. I work for an organization that sells collaboration tools. However, a word of warning, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So you've just made them faster. And so you have to be really conscious around when you pick technology as a solution. I wish I trademarked collaboration, transformation, and platform when I was 7, because then I could be retired. But the idea of technology being the answer, I think, belies the fact that the biggest challenge we have as a society, as a community, as a government, in the economy and business, is the way humans interact with other humans. And so if you can find ways of working collaboratively or creatively or with curiosity with another human, and you can find a good way of doing that, then share that as your secret sauce and your superpower, because technology will amplify that, but it won't give you that skill set. You need to care about it and be able to do it yourself. So before I wrap up, what I want you to do now is, with the person next to you, just share your collaboration superpower. The thing that you're just really, really good at. No room for humility here, no room for overachievers. Just what is the thing that you do on a daily or weekly basis? Just share it with the person next to you, and that is your collaboration superpower. So take 20 seconds, trust your instinct, go. Okay, a quick game is a good game, is my first philosophy. My second philosophy is sharing is caring. So, any sharers in the room? Anyone brave enough to share their collaboration superpower? It won't cost you anything. Yes?
Megaphoning shy people in the room.
Megaphoning shy people in the room. So you find a way of finding the people that have ideas but maybe don't feel confident in their voice and amplify them. That is can we give her a round of applause, please? That's a tremendous superpower. Who else?
Can I actually say my friends here?
You can.
So she's a connector.
A connector.
She finds great things and then shares and connects people so that they can actually start to...
Brilliant. Connection is very... So relationships are crucial, right, in collaboration. It's about saying, I know you're interested in X, you're on Y, and you're thinking about A, B, C, but actually there's some overlap here, and I think a conversation could be worthwhile. Awesome. Who else? Yes?
I want to share my colleagues.
Yes.
Beautiful. So it's really thinking about the people first.
Yes, people first.
So really focusing on the relationships that way.
Yep, so people and relationships. Brilliant. There's another hand over here, and then we can do the mic quickly just behind you. Awesome, thank you.
I would like to share my partner as well. She said using the layman term to explain complex concepts.
Hallelujah, the plain English term. I mean, the number of cross-conceptualization, strategic realignment meetings I've been in where, what are we doing? Saving money. Good, good. You could have just said that. There is this weird conflation with intelligent language that actually, I think it's reverse correlation. Like the more intelligent language you use, I think you're just hiding. So plain English, not only is it good for cutting through the bullshit, it also brings a lot of people on board who maybe aren't accustomed to the nuances of colloquial language and weird words. Anyone else around here while the microphone's...
I have this innate ability to kind of understand what the commonality is in networks,
Yes.
which was already discussed, and I think I just naturally listen like I'm wrong.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So that is a muscle. That's another round of applause. So these are all muscles that you have. Now, this game was a trick. So the people that shared, just raise your hand if you've shared that with anyone else before. So here's the struggle with collaboration. You've all got superpowers that you can share free of charge, no funding, no investment, no recourse, no cost, no retribution, no platform, no technology. You don't need anything just to say to someone else, hey, I've got this collaboration superpower that works for me, and I'm going to give it to you for free. And if you use it, cool, and if you don't, I don't mind. For whatever reason, we need to find a way of getting out of our own way and realizing that if we are good at something, sharing that lesson learned free of charge with someone else is the gift that keeps on giving, and you probably won't get any recourse for it. I particularly like the fact that some people shared the thing they'd learned from someone else, right? And again, that's what enables me to think about the future of work. I've learned infinitely more from other people that I interact with in the last 3 years than I have from any business book or business article, because they're written for generic people versus meeting someone who's got a real life experience. So if you want to start the path to collaboration, start by role modeling that and sharing your superpower and then listening for everyone else's, and you'll be amazed how much better you get at it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dom, for sharing and caring in that way. You have been very excellent elephants up to this point. So now, for most of the time, so now I think is the perfect time to turn to your hippo mode, or perhaps your hippo-elephant hybrid, hippophant. So please, if anyone has any reactions, comments, dissent, questions, observations, Dom and Penny have given us a lot to think about.
A quick question for Dom, and thank you very much. That's really great. One of the things that occurred to me as I heard you speaking was that, for me, this idea of creating psychological safety within the space, whether you lead the team, you're part of the team, is really important, because getting people at ease and reducing the noise inside means that people do share. So I thought I'd ask you to reflect on it and ask if that is something that resonates with you. What's one thing that you do to create that kind of environment within your teams?
Great question. So for those that don't know, psychological safeties came out of Project Aristotle research by Google into over 300 teams around what amplified team performance. It's a great piece of research that's cited enviably quite a lot. For us, psychological safety is kind of like yeah, of course. Let's talk about the mistakes first. I love talking about anti-patterns. So psychological safety falls into the same bucket as vulnerability and empathy. The more you talk about it, the less you do it. Right? If you've ever worked with a leader who's like, I'm being vulnerable right now, and so I'm vulnerable, so I've demonstrated vulnerability, that's exactly what they're not doing. Right? So you can't achieve psychological safety by sitting with a group of people and going, we have safety, don't we? We are. I mean, I feel safe. We must feel safe, right? So you can't presume or assume it. It is an act, and it is a practice. It is something that you demonstrate and do, and it's a set of behaviors. For us, we've got a very diverse workforce of engineers, researchers, data scientists, designers, product managers, marketing, HR, legal, finance. Like, we've got a breadth of skills, and we're across 12 different locations in the world. So all those languages, customs, and cultures of a large India office, a Japan office, US, Australia, Poland. So we get all that stuff. The thing that we've made a first-class citizen to help build psychological safety, which is a constant evolution, is something called team health. We actually get our teams to assess the health of how they work, human to human, on a regular basis, as simple as thumb up, thumb sideways, or thumb down. So one of the areas is we have a shared understanding of why we're doing what we're doing, and we trust each other. And we stand around and we go 3, 2, 1, and you either go thumb up, yes, I agree, sideways, not so good, not so bad, thumb down, I disagree. And then we discuss what we saw that made us vote that way. And so we've been running with that for about 6 years to help scale Atlassian and stay effective, and to keep psychological safety and ways of working as a first-class citizen. And that is available to all of you free of charge. So because knowledge isn't power, the application of knowledge is power, we give away our knowledge for free. And so if you go into Atlassian Team Playbook, all of our rituals of how our teams work, we've open sourced, and you get to use free. You don't have to be a customer, you don't have to do anything, you don't have to sign on. You get that free of charge, but that enables you to say, how do we assess our health? And then once you do, we've got plays and exercises in there. How do we build the muscle if we're lacking in a certain area? And that is something that you never finish. There is no end goal. It's constantly evolving, and we constantly work on it.
I was also going to ask about team leadership, but since that's already been done, tell me about the role of the CEO, the role of the top person in setting the culture of the organisation, and just broadly about organisational culture. What does that mean to you? How does that affect your day-to-day teamwork, collaboration?
Again, great question. I might use the same way of answering. The anti-pattern, right, is to talk about culture, and to talk about it as a singular thing. Literally, a little bit of me dies every time I read the paper, and a new leader comes out and says, we're spending $20 million on culture transformation. I'm like, you're so broken. Because by the time you're announcing that to the press, that's not cool, right? That's not a good thing. The realization that culture is a manifestation of how you work and the things you stand up for, and is not a dial that you can turn, right? We have become bizarrely ignorant and arrogant in how we think we can control culture, and we can't. Instead of that, I prefer the philosophy of values. What are the things that as an organization you value? How do you hire people with similar values, but who will demonstrate those values in a different way? And the reason being is, in my time at Deloitte and in other unnamed organizations, I felt more a member of a cult than a culture. Okay? Where you literally look around the office and you're like, oh, we are all the same. How cool is this? We're, like, literally everyone's the same. It is literally robotic. And so culture isn't singular. It's many, and culture for us is a constant evolution. So we have stopped hiring for culture fit. We started hiring for values. Our values are things like don't F the customer, open company, no BS, play as a team, be the change you seek, build with heart and balance. And we look for people that have the same values as us, but they manifest in their own unique way. The role of the CEOs is then crystal clear. You either live by those values the same as everyone else, or you don't. So I have a belief, in fact, we'll do this as a test. Can you put your hand up if you're a role model? I'm just going to wait till you all put your hand up. So everyone has to put the hand up. It's legally binding for you to, you've had a free lunch or a free drink. Every one of you in the room is a role model. You put your hands down now, you're a very polite bunch. So everyone in the room is a role model. People think role modeling is leadership. Right, it's not. The two things that got conflated a long time ago. We're all role models in family, with friends, or at work, or whatever you do. The challenge with role modeling, no one comes up and tells you when they're role modeling you. Right, so what's your name, sir? Wayne, right? So if I came up to you and went, Wayne, I'm mirroring your behaviors right now because I really like them, you'd call HR. So what happens is when I role model you, I don't tell you. I also don't know if you're having a good day or a bad day. I don't know if I've got grumpy Wayne or happy Wayne. And so every single person in an organization, in an institution, in a system is a role model. The decision is what behaviors do you want to stand up for and live by, because they are the ones that people will mimic. And so for our founders, for every one of our leaders at every level in every part of the organization, we live our values every single day. They are not posters on the wall. And our recognition system and our performance review system is built using those values as well. So they'll live throughout the organization.
I'll just add that I completely embrace that view. And it's quite interesting that what is the role of the CEO and the leadership. It's very much a sort of traditional workplace structure. And I think, having come myself from bureaucracy, where the role of the senior people is, to sit in command and tell others what to do, not actually to show. That whole idea that everybody is actually a leader and everybody has a responsibility for values and for performance is actually a very different way of thinking about it. And I think quite antithetical sometimes to the hierarchies that we find, in traditional companies and maybe in universities and definitely in government. And the mindset, I think, you can actually, to pick up your point, Dom, you can actually change these things by not saying, we can't do that because we're in a hierarchy, but by actually just owning it, like your collaboration superpowers, actually owning a different way of showing up and mindset, which then just transforms entirely a workplace. Speaking very personally, my current role I came into, and there'd been one CEO for 29 years. And I have very, very different set of behaviors given where I'd come from, particularly working in an American tech company, to the kind of dominant culture in the university and then in my own organization. And so quite interesting having to very explicitly, for myself, let alone my teams, call that out. And there's no right or wrong. It's not one way is better than another. It's how does everybody want to work, and how are you going to find a set of values that you can cohere around. So
I'm going to abuse my stool and ask a question that follows on from that, and it also picks up on a couple of points that were made at the very start when you invited input, Penny, at the start. So the point of hierarchy has come up a few times, as have inequality of resources. It's obviously very challenging to park one's ego at the door. It's perhaps even more challenging to park one's property rights at the door. And I wonder if, beyond thinking oneself into a new mindset, when you're collaborating across profound inequality, does that require redistribution as well? Or is that not necessarily part of the equation?
I might just give a quick version answer to that. I think every scenario by its very nature is unique. So if I think about every piece of research or insights we're trying to gain, some of them inherently uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and we just do not know, and we find out by shipping stuff and listening, right? And so there's no amount of research that's going to there's no amount of sitting in a room or sitting anywhere will give us the answer. The only way we find out the answer is by doing. And when we do, we have to do that whilst holding our breath and crossing our fingers, because we genuinely don't know what's going to happen. The things we report out to the press are all the good things that happened, because that makes you look awesome. But along the way, for every experiment that's successful, there's one that fails. And that's because our rules of engagement differ from that, which is very volatile, through to more certain things where you can have much clearer rules of engagement. Essentially, in any rules of engagement for us, it's always around setting the expectation. What am I willing to give up? What am I willing to trade? I'm working with a team right now researching something that is going to be very powerful to Atlassian in terms of how we think about teamwork, and we had a trade-off decision to make yesterday. We bring more people in what we call under the tent. We bring more people in, we accelerate, but we lose control. Are we willing to do that? And on this one, we're like, yeah, because this will accelerate us not only in how quickly we can do the idea, but we think it will amplify the idea, and so we are consciously giving up control to move faster. I think the situation we often find ourselves in is that happens to you and you have to react or respond, and it may not be the optimal way of doing it. So it makes things a lot slower, but when we sit down in a virtual or physical room, is to go, what are we willing to trade off? And is this fair and equitable? Like, are we doing this on purpose or by accident?
Great question, Fleur, and I've got some questions for you. But just picking up on that last point of Dom's about fairness and equity. So you're asking the question about when you're in an unequal relationship, how do you go forward? And I think just having those values around, quite frankly, fairness, number one. Number two, openness and communication, very definitely. And thirdly, a degree of, I'm going to call it intercultural sensitivity. And I don't mean that between Australia and Indonesia. I mean between different partners in a relationship if there is inequality. It's really deeply stopping and understanding the position of the people you're trying to collaborate with or excite or engage. The best thing to overcome inequality is actually the communication and the understanding respect, which is a very old-fashioned word, but so undervalued. Respect and then empathy for the other position. So let me give a very specific example, which is a cross-cultural example. I've done a huge amount of work in emerging Asia, and it's very interesting watching countries show up, you know, Australia, for example, show up in Indonesia and say to Indonesia, oh, you're a poor country, 55% of your school graduates are functionally illiterate. We know what you need. We know what you need. We've got the answer. We've got the funds, we've got the program, we're all good to go. Actually, in many parts of Asia, including Indonesia, they call Australians and Australian politicians in particular, men, because they're usually men with no ears. To keep riffing on that, they call them men with no ears. There is a really big inequality between Australia's capacity to show up, bring the insight, the research, capability, the money, and do it. And in that particular case, in the education sector in Indonesia, the ability to show up and do it themselves. How do you overcome that sort of gap? Is stopping, respecting, and not actually believing that you've got all the answers, listening to what the needs are very, very closely, and then co-designing and co-creating for impact. And I know I'm sort of helicoptering out from Dom, your very specific team-based stuff, to how does this actually happen at the big, country-to-country, organisation-to-organisation level. But I think the lessons are very similar in situations of inequality. It's about parking the ego and actually developing that sort of shared and mutual understanding and then shared interest in the outcome.
I'm just really curious about how you see it working from the other side of things. So as an early career researcher, let's say, I'm often the one with less power than my collaborators, and that can be for university teams partnering with industry and so on. So I understand what you're saying about dropping the ego when you're coming from that privileged position, but what about on the reverse?
I'll take a quick go at that. So having just moved from a very big senior corporate role with huge resources to a small not-for-profit attached to a university, I've experienced this pretty firsthand immediately. I think when you're in the position of less power and trying to forge those relationships and get that attention, the same things actually pertain. It's being really clear and communicating clearly about what you're bringing to the table and about the value that you've got to offer and about where the shared interest is. So it's actually the power that you've got from where you sit. You have something that even if it's a huge corporation or the government, they don't have. And to draw out and to communicate what is unique about that and to make that useful is actually, I think, the key. I know it's really hard, and I honestly, I struggle with it every day at the moment because I'm not used to being in that position and having to make the case constantly for why the issues that we work on, engagement with Asia, diversity, cross-cultural communication, all of these things, to make the case for why they matter and why we can actually help shift the dial on that is tough. Does that answer your question a bit?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is kind of like work out what your currency is. I think the currency of positional power is the worst power you can have. In virtually every case study you read about the world, when someone exalts positional power, like really shit things happen. So let's not go for positional power. Work out what your currency is, which is I've got an idea, or I've got depth, or I've got access to resources, or I've got a view that you haven't got. And this is my currency. And if that currency is something you want to buy, awesome. We have equity together. If this currency isn't something you want to buy, my values are going to take me somewhere else. And I think when you realize your currency and your value is something other than power, that's when the conversation really changes for me.
My name is Anastasia. I'm actually from Indonesia, but I haven't been home. I mean, like going for a work or anything like that for 15 years. So I barely knows how to be Indonesian anymore. But I'm still Indonesian, and I would like to have some kind of collaboration or do something for my country. But as you know, there's a lot of this gender and age problem, especially because I'm a female. And so yeah, I want to go home and do something, but I'm actually scared because when I was young, we always think, this is foreigner, they must be smarter than us. But sounds like it's not. Like from your experience, they don't have this mentality. So that's why I might be outdated about what Indonesian thinks of outsider. So am I, the fact that I'm actually Indonesian, but I came from overseas, is that actually an advantage, or they will still look at me just like, this young Indonesian girl?
Can I take a chance at that? Yes. So I came back from Indonesia on Friday night last week. So I've just been in Indonesia, and in the last 15 years, while you've been here, I've been living there and working there. And, I've experienced this in coming back to Australia, actually. When you say it's about gender and it's about age and it's about knowing, I think in whatever context you're in, whether it's me coming back to Australia and learning the language and the culture and understanding the context, or you going back, I think it comes back to that really powerful point that Dom made. It's not about your age, your gender, your position. It's actually about your currency and your influence and how you want to show up. So what is it that you've got to bring to the table? And I can guarantee you what's so exciting in contemporary Indonesia, including in the tech sector, is if you've got an amazing idea and a lot of energy and a capacity, figuring out, taking that to the table and finding like-minded people is really easy. It's really exciting. But it's a question of not putting yourself in a box and saying, I'm constrained by, by my experience. It's figuring out what that currency is you want to bring to a collaboration.
Penny acknowledged me to talk, and Dom had looked at the other person, so there was a bit of a mix-up.
Sorry.
Oh, no, it's a non-issue. I'm just trying to point something out. So what did I do? I said, oh, I'm sorry. And that's typical of women saying, I'm sorry. So I put myself on a training program a while back to not say I'm sorry, but I fell off the wagon and I'm going to get back on that bloody wagon. So what I wanted to ask about was, and this is demonstrating making yourself vulnerable, toxic workplaces, which many people are in, and it's very easy to say, stick to your principles, get out, go somewhere else. It's not so easy to do. And when you believe in the mission of an organisation, you might want to try and make change. So any tips for people in those situations?
Find an ally, because there's got to be one somewhere. You won't be alone. There'll be someone else who's going home at night talking to the cactus or their dog and going, I love the mission, but Bob in finance is fucking killing me, right? And so find that ally, because together your power will multiply. And don't find that ally for a whinge. They're not the person you go for a coffee with and talk about how terrible it is. They're the person where you go, between us we can change this. Then you find the smallest manageable thing to change and then demonstrate the value of it. What I find in a lot of toxic work environments is people become the product of their environment and they think they need permission, and they're never going to get permission in a toxic environment. So just do it anyway. If you get fired for it, go out with a blaze of fire, right? And if you don't get fired for it, you've just role modeled the behavior you want everyone else to do. And that's because I think the hardest thing about being in a toxic environment is you just accept it. It becomes the norm, right? And actually, you become the toxic environment the minute you accept it. You become complicit as part of it. And so finding little, small, manageable experiments to run, and then each one, you get another ally. You get another advocate, and suddenly you build momentum for change without ever having a program, a poster, a sign-off, a project manager. You don't need any of that to drive change, because behavior is human to human. And so I've seen people do that in some stifling environments and have success, and I've seen just as many people try that, fail, and walk. Because once you've tried it, when you do walk, you walk with your head held high because you gave it a good go.
I like the team health idea. So, I know just little pivots in what you're doing in a toxic environment is really, as Dom says, fabulous. But actually raising the issue around team health with people who are the leaders, or even at the, doing it organically, making it part of water cooler behavior, and actually making it explicit, that's actually quite a good thing to do too. And it can be really hard to embed, because often leaders in toxic environments are the last ones who would agree to doing like check-ins and team health. But even doing it within your own little work unit or your own group of buddies, doing that checking, how are we all doing, how are you feeling, that practice can then spread. And I think that becomes really beneficial to actually make it explicit when people are feeling like that.
A little game you can play. This is free as well. Everything's free today. You get one, you all get one. Next time, in any situation, you hear someone whinge about someone else, what you say to them is, how did they respond when you told them? It's brilliant, right? And they go, oh no, I've not told them. Oh no. No, they just really annoy me, and they've been annoying me for years. And you're like, but what did they say when you told them? Oh no, I'm not going to tell them. And you're like, if they don't know they're doing that behavior, they can't read your mind. And so if we're not willing to pony up, and one of the things I've realized, I get to work a lot with Patty McCord, who used to be the Chief Talent Officer from Netflix, who's not only hilarious, but an absolute bugger on the wine. But she says, Humans can take the truth way better than spin 100% of the time. We can take truth better than spin 100% of the time. And yet when we're in these difficult conversations, we're like, have I got a challenge? I've got a mission for you, which is code for a terrible piece of work. All right, so how can we give them that honest feedback in a respectful and constructive way? Because if we don't, you can't expect them to change their behavior.
Actually, I love the thing around feedback. One of the things that I've actually found interesting, and this goes to your point earlier about language in the university, I heard for the first time this term, the tyranny of civility, which is code in the university for we don't actually say directly what we mean. And coming from a community in the American tech sector where feedback is something you do all the time, you're taught how to do it, actually, because there is a language which can be respectful and constructive and strengths-based that makes it really, makes it easier to deliver and easier to receive. And the practice of doing that constantly gets you much better at it. The more you do it, the better you are. But when it comes to some of the environments, recognizing our cultures are different, in government, to be honest, that is not part of the culture. And if you start providing feedback, like I would have had in McKinsey, even strengths-based, you'll get in a lot of trouble. And, I'm not sure about the context here, but how you think about that point about honesty and providing feedback is crucial to the collaboration, but recognizing the context you're in and then finding a language that is going to have impact. Because if you've got a tyranny of civility and, loudmouth feedback, all you've got in the middle between that is conflagration and a lot of pain. So I think just being really explicit and trying to understand context and language is crucial if you're going to have a meeting of minds on those issues.
I just wanted to add a comment. That whole feedback thing would just not work. I'm sorry, but even if you seek out feedback with certainly in my experience with people from certain cultural backgrounds, it just does not work. Even if you actively seek it and you actively encourage it and say, "Hey, I want you to tell me if I'm shit, or if I'm annoying you, or whatever," that is just not welcome in some. And maybe it is a learning, but I just feel like that's going to be like a generational and a cultural thing, all wrapped up in one. And I just, I encounter that all the time. Like like you, Dom, blunt as, say exactly what I think, but that really gets me into trouble sometimes. And I'm just really having to learn, especially with the different cultures, especially the Asian cultures. It's just way too confrontational, even to ask for it or to offer it, even if you ask permission. So, I don't know what your view is on that, whether you work mostly in Western.
No, all over. This may be an insight for you. It may be something you already know. It turns out I have a preferred way of receiving feedback as a really overconfident alpha male, which is in person and in the moment. I'm like, can you give me some feedback? Apparently to some people that's quite threatening. Little did I know, right? So again, I never heard from the introverts when I pointed at them and said, tell me what you think, and they cowered in the corner and stared at their shoes. I got none the wiser, and then I blamed them, which is just silly, right? And so what I found is I find with people what is the preferred medium and what is the preferred frequency. My preferred is in the moment with an example. Their preferred, like someone I'm working with right now, they're like, I will give you feedback at the end of the month in an email. And I'm like, okay. Because what I want is the feedback, and I have to park my ego at the door and go, whilst I have my preferred way of receiving that, if you've not got a preferred way of giving it, then I've heard nothing. And so it's painful for me, because I'm like, in the moment's better, I can action it. There's a whole lot of good stuff to that. That's just my preference. That's my communication style. So I'm learning slowly to discover other mediums.
Could I just add, having managed many teams with very diverse nationalities remotely, so across 18 different markets with very, very different cultures. To Dom's point, you actually need to understand what everybody needs individually in terms of how they prefer to communicate and get feedback. But one of the ways in which I was able, because the team actually had to perform, not just a set of individuals. So one of the ways of finding a team way, which was acceptable through very different cultures, was actually focusing it around the mission and our impact and our tasks rather than around the individual. So where we could be assessing our impact jointly and where we were going, then we'd actually have a platform for, then analysing better where we might have been performing better or we could have done things differently. So those 2 points, be clear about the context and the preference, but also you don't always have to make it directly personal. It can actually be about the project. And that's crucial in collaboration. That is, to go back to our theme today, high-performing teams require a degree of, respect, intercultural capability, which we talk about a lot in AsiaLink, but also sometimes actually focusing back to my very first point on what was the impact here that we're after. And that allows you to have the conversation a different way around.
Question here. Going back to the comment about listening like you're wrong, and this may have been answered by some of the questions about equality and the sort of hierarchy that you have at the table. But if you're at a table of collaborators and you're listening like you're wrong, which is great, but nobody else is, how do you deal with that?
I was just realising how fortunate I am that I'm very rarely in that situation, right? I was trying to actually go through my graveyard of scenarios because I'm fortunate enough to work with people that have a very similar intent to me. And when that intent is similar, me role modelling, listening like I'm wrong, it's just a matter of time. And they don't do it immediately, right? No one's that self-aware. But eventually, right, we start to pick up on we're social animals, we pick up on the social cues and move. Essentially, if someone's not willing to do that, I would guess that the currency is one of power, not of willingness to solve the idea. I use the power of questions quite a lot if I'm trying to break down a room. I work a lot with very strong personalities, very adamant, very resilient personalities. I certainly work a lot in the C-suite with a lot of old, stale male senior leaders, right, who this is the way we've always done things. And so with them, there is no amount of me telling them that will get them to see the world differently, but there's a million questions I can ask them to make them uncomfortable. And that's not me manipulating, it's me trying to say, hey, how do we really scratch the surface of this? So do you honestly believe that if you deploy all the things all the techniques you've used for the last 40 years, you'll still be successful? Do you honestly believe that everyone in this organization looks at you as a role model? Do you think everyone aspires to be more like you? Do you think your communications are inspirational? Right? I can ask a myriad of questions, again, not to break them, but to get them to realize that I have IP and knowledge, they have IP and knowledge, everyone around the table has IP and knowledge, and it's all different. And if they can hear everyone else, they've got an infinitely better chance of being successful. Some people just can't. They just can't do it. It's a skill set, it's a muscle. And if they can't do it, we've just got to jog on and accept that they can't. But for me, over time in practice, more people are willing to do that than not. And if they're not, I'm probably going to go and find a different table because I think there's plenty of people that will and can.
Flo, can I ask you a question? I'm really interested in hearing from you or from others in the audience about a great example of a successful cross-sectoral collaboration you might have been involved in your university career and given your particular interests. And what were the kind of hallmarks of what did you do to make that successful?
I guess one example was cross-sectoral, I guess only in a limited sense, so more cross-disciplinary.
Interdisciplinary.
So a 6-year, it was funded for 3 years, but we did it for about 6 years, project in the Mekong River Basin, looking at dam development in the Mekong River Basin, which was between geographers and myself and other law colleagues, but also that involved a lot of collaboration with informants and researchers in the region. So throughout the region, in Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam and Thailand. And I guess what the thing that I learnt from that was how much time had to be put into just making those people comfortable with one another. That a lot of the work that enabled us to do things like write together and have a really frank discussion, which we did with colleagues throughout the region in the end, but we certainly didn't in the early stages, was just doing things together, doing practical things together. So in that instance, among the researchers, travelling together, doing fieldwork together, just eating together, all that kind of... And it was only in retrospect that I realised it really wasn't working for the first couple of years. And it was also... It took a long time to learn from each other. So one member of the team had been working for 30 years in the region and also had specific language skills. So he brought a tremendous amount to the table, but I guess we all brought different things to the table, but it took a long time to actually eat the things on the table. I mean, to actually have them there, and not just on paper. And it was really about almost like living together that took, and also very careful attention to questions of power and flagging things and getting things that were creating tension. I think writing together is a very fraught and difficult process, but also incredibly rewarding. So it took longer to write than anything else I've written, that book, but it was so, I just feel as though I've learnt from that project so much more than it is ever going to be on the page, and that I've carried so much into that project. But I'm conscious that we are running out of time. But we did have, yeah.
Own it, ask it, Dave.
Okay, all right. Okay, so you're talking about collaboration. We're on an academic territory here, but also we're looking at collaboration with industry. I'm interested in how, if you want to collaborate with industry, how best to approach that. I'm a PhD student, but I'm outward focused rather than academic focused. So I'm really curious about how one goes about creating those connections. Do you do as I do, which is just sort of look people up and think, yeah, I'd want to work with you and get in touch? Is that kind of as simple as it gets?
I think that plus a common mission.
Yeah, of course.
Because when you can attach to that mission, that's where your currency becomes even more valuable. Here's the thing I've got that you've not, that I think will benefit you, and how can we complement? The main thing for me, and our internal research team struggle with this as well, which is perfection is the killer to progress. And a lot of our researchers love perfection. They want to get the answer. I'm like, there isn't an answer, there's an insight. So the quicker you can find an insight that I can action, I will love you. If you disappear into a dark room for 3 years and come out and tell me the answer's 6, I've probably delivered on that already in the time you've gone and proven it. So how can you not sacrifice your academic acumen, but how can you get actionable insights quickly so that you work in the language of the people you're working with?
The only thing I would just amplify from Dom's answer is actually recognising that mutuality and trying to use the language, if you want an industry collaboration, of industry, not academia. And honestly, they are not always mutually intelligible. So understanding from the get-go that to be relevant and impactful in an industry collaboration, you're going to have to shift ground towards them, and they're going to have to shift ground towards you to be mutually intelligible around the shared value and the shared impact. And I think people often misunderstand and underestimate that gap. And I literally, I teach communications in my spare time, having to teach my own team what the differences are between academic communication and boardroom communication in a corporate. Phenomenal difference. So try and educate yourself better on that cross-sectoral communication so you can have the impact.
So I want to ask you in a moment to join me in thanking Penny and Don for taking really a very large chunk of their day out to so generously share with us their insights and experiences. But before I do, I just wanted to mention that a couple of themes that have come out of today that really merit a whole discussion of their own are going to have a whole discussion of their own, thankfully. As I mentioned, we have an event on the 28th of October, which will focus on languages in collaboration, languages of collaboration in every sense of that term. And that features researchers from 3 different Sydney-based universities, our own Denis Del Favero, Scienti Professor in Art and Design, who'll be talking in particular about visual media of representation and communication. Nick Enfield, who is Director of the Social Sciences and Humanities Advanced Research Centre at Sydney University and a linguist, and who's got a major research project on post-truth politics. And Amanda Third from the Western Sydney University, who looks at socio-cultural practices of young people using technology. So approaching the question of language from a range, and this question of collaboration from a range of different perspectives. So please join us for that event, and you can sign up on the website. And then in November, the question of time came up earlier. We're going to revisit that question, not only the question of how to make time for collaboration, but also how to get people to work together when they're oriented towards profoundly different time horizons. Some people oriented towards the future, some people bound up in a particular past. Also the rhythms and temporalities of collaboration will come out in that. And that features our own Dorothea Fabian, Associate Dean for Research Training in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, whose research looks at interpretation of Western classical music. So she'll approach it from that perspective. Ben Newell, who's a professor of cognitive psychology, who looks a lot at decision-making around a number of issues, but in particular around climate change. And Ralph Ashton from the Australian Futures Institute. So I really urge you to join us if you can for those discussions, and we will continue the discussion into 2020. So if you have ideas for other aspects of collaboration or ways of tackling this topic, practical or discursive in this mode, please share those with us via the website. But let me first ask you to join me in thanking so much Penny and Dom. And before I ask you to stick around and feel free to finish the food and stay around for as long as you like, I did just want to mention a few other people who deserve thanks and without whom this would not have happened. Noelle Fegan, our Project Director of Meridian 180 at UNSW. Where's Noelle? At the back of the room. And Noelle has some sign-up sheets if you'd like some more information about events that, or have some thoughts for Meridian 180 or would like to understand a bit more about what it is and where it came from, please feel free to sign up. So thank you to Noelle, and also the amazing Grand Challenges team, Kojo, Ayasin Anan. Where's Kojo? There, thank you so much. And Mariam Al-Badri, who's been handing it, thank you, and Vanessa Carley and Meryl Stone, and of course Rob Brooks, who heads up the whole thing, who's not here today, but here in spirit. And thank you also to the whole Roundhouse team and to Bruce Dufty from UNSW TV and Mad on audio, everyone who's involved. And thank you for taking time out to have this discussion. I found it really enlightening and interesting, and I hope you've taken away something that you might try out over the next coming weeks, and hopefully see you in October. Thanks so much.